She walked for miles across the empty prairie, exhausted and terrified, until she finally whispered the words that would change everything. What happened to her mother in the storm? And why was a Comanche warrior the only one who could save her? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Fort Griffin in the summer of 1875. Sarah Mitchell wiped the sweat from her brow as she guided her horse-drawn wagon through the rutted road, her 7-year-old daughter Emma sitting beside her on the wooden bench. The frontier town bustled with activity as soldiers, traders, and settlers moved about their daily business. Sarah had come to purchase supplies for their small homestead, located 5 miles north of the fort, a modest plot of land her late husband had claimed 3 years before his death from pneumonia. Now, as a widow trying to survive in the harsh Texas landscape, every trip to town was both necessary and fraught with anxiety. Emma clutched her cloth doll tightly, her bright blue eyes taking in the unfamiliar sights of the busy settlement. The little girl's blonde hair was tied back with a faded ribbon, and her simple cotton dress showed signs of careful mending. She rarely accompanied her mother to town, usually staying with their neighbor Mrs. Henderson, but today the elderly woman was ill, and Sarah had no choice but to bring her daughter along. As they passed the livery stable, a tall figure caught Sarah's attention. A Comanche warrior stood near the hitching post, his presence commanding immediate notice despite the casual way he leaned against the wooden structure. His long black hair was adorned with a single eagle feather, and his buckskin clothing was decorated with intricate beadwork. His face was striking, with high cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to observe everything with quiet intensity. Unlike many of the Comanche who had been forcibly relocated to reservations, this man moved freely through the fort, suggesting he served as a scout or interpreter for the army. Sarah quickly averted her gaze, focusing on steering the wagon toward the general store. She had heard stories about the Comanche raids that had terrorized settlements throughout Texas, though the Army's presence at Fort Griffin had brought relative peace to the immediate area. Still, her heart beat faster as she felt those dark eyes follow her wagon's progress down the street. The warrior's name was Dakota, which meant friend to all in his native tongue. At 28 years old, he had lived through the violent transformation of his people's way of life. He had fought against the encroachment of settlers, had witnessed the slaughter of buffalo herds that sustained his tribe, and had eventually made the difficult decision to work with the army as a scout and guide. It was a choice that brought him scorn from some of his people, but Dakota believed it was the only way to protect what remained of the Comanche nation. His role at Fort Griffin gave him a unique position, respected by the soldiers for his tracking skills and knowledge of the land, yet forever an outsider in both worlds. Dakota watched the blonde woman and her daughter with idle curiosity. He had seen many settlers come through Fort Griffin, most viewing him with fear or contempt. This woman seemed different somehow, her exhaustion evident in the way she moved, her worry visible in the protective way she held her daughter close. He turned his attention back to the conversation with Lieutenant James Morrison, who was discussing a scouting expedition planned for the following week. "We need to map the Western Territories more accurately," Morrison explained, spreading a crude map across a nearby barrel. "Colonel Davidson wants to establish better supply routes between the forts. Your knowledge of the water sources and terrain would be invaluable, Dakota." The warrior studied the map, his finger tracing potential routes. "The western canyons hold water year-round," he said in fluent English, his accent barely noticeable after years of practice. "But the paths are narrow. Wagons would struggle. Better to go north than west. Takes longer, but safer for supplies." Morrison nodded, making notes on the map. Dakota had proven himself reliable countless times, his guidance helping avoid ambushes and finding safe passage through dangerous territory. The lieutenant trusted him in ways he would never trust most scouts, Indian or otherwise. Meanwhile, Sarah completed her purchases at the general store, loading flour, salt, coffee, and other essentials into the back of her wagon. Emma helped carry smaller items, her little arms straining with packages of dried beans. The storekeeper, a portly man named Mr. Hutchins, tallied the costs with a pencil stub. "That'll be $8.40, Mrs. Mitchell," he announced, his voice lacking sympathy for her financial situation. Sarah counted out the coins carefully, each one representing hours of work churning butter, gathering eggs, and tending her small vegetable garden. She had barely enough to cover the cost. With nothing left over for the peppermint sticks, Emma was eyeing longingly in a glass jar on the counter. "Maybe next time, sweetheart," Sarah whispered to her daughter, seeing the disappointment in those innocent eyes. As they prepared to leave, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, an unusual sight in the typically dry summer months. Sarah frowned, calculating whether she could make it home before the storm hit. The 5-mile journey would take at least 90 minutes with the loaded wagon, and those clouds were moving fast. "Best hurry, ma'am," Mr. Hutchins advised, glancing out the window. "That storm looks like it means business." Sarah nodded, helping Emma onto the wagon bench before climbing up herself. She snapped the reins, and the 2 horses began pulling the heavy load back toward the main street. The wind had picked up, sending small dust devils swirling through the town. Other people were hurrying to complete their business and seek shelter. As Sarah's wagon passed the livery stable again, one of her wheels hit a deep rut. The sudden jolt caused several packages to slide toward the edge of the wagon bed. Emma turned around and reached for them, trying to keep them from falling, but her small hands couldn't grip everything at once. A sack of flour tumbled over the side, splitting open on the ground and creating a white cloud in the dusty street. "Oh no," Sarah exclaimed, pulling the horses to a stop. She climbed down quickly, staring at the ruined flour with dismay. That represented a significant portion of her remaining money, now wasted and mixing with the dirt. Before she could even begin to process the loss, Dakota appeared beside her. He had witnessed the accident and moved with the quick reflexes of a warrior. "This cannot be saved," he said simply, his deep voice startling her. Sarah jumped, instinctively stepping back. Up close, the Comanche warrior was even more imposing, standing well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone accustomed to physical hardship. But his expression wasn't threatening. Instead, his dark eyes showed something that might have been sympathy. I know," Sarah stammered, trying to control the tears threatening to form. She couldn't afford to replace the flour, and winter was only a few months away. She needed to preserve and store as much food as possible. Emma climbed down from the wagon, standing close to her mother and staring up at the tall warrior with wide eyes. She had never been this close to a Comanche before, and despite her mother's tension, she felt more curious than afraid. Dakota looked down at the child, then back at the mother. He could see the desperation in the woman's face, the calculations of survival that frontier widows had to constantly make. On impulse, he reached into the leather pouch at his belt and pulled out several coins. "Take this. Replace the flour." Sarah stared at the money, then at him, confusion and pride warring on her face. "I couldn't possibly accept that. I don't even know you." "Then we are strangers helping strangers," Dakota replied. "The storm comes. You need to reach home. Accept this, replace your supplies, and go." Before Sarah could protest further, Lieutenant Morrison approached, having witnessed the exchange. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'd accept his help if I were you. Dakota is a man of honor. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better about accepting." The first drops of rain began to fall, large and heavy. Sarah looked at the sky, then at her daughter, then back at the coins in Dakota's extended hand. Practicality won over pride. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking the money. "I'll repay you, I promise." "There is no debt," Dakota said firmly. "Go now. The storm will be fierce." Sarah nodded, quickly purchasing a replacement sack of flour from Mr. Hutchins, who had watched the entire scene from his store window. Within minutes, she had the wagon loaded again, and was urging the horses into a faster pace, heading north out of town as the rain began to fall in earnest. Dakota watched them go, something stirring in his chest that he couldn't quite name. There had been something in the woman's eyes beyond just desperation, a strength and determination that reminded him of the Comanche women he had known, warriors in their own right, even if they never carried weapons into battle. "That was kind of you," Morrison commented, standing beside him as they both sought shelter from the increasing rain. "It was necessary," Dakota replied, though he wasn't entirely sure why it had felt so urgent to help. The storm that hit Fort Griffin that afternoon was indeed fierce, with lightning splitting the sky and rain falling in sheets that turned the streets into rivers of mud. Dakota took shelter in the small room he maintained at the fort, listening to the thunder and thinking about the blonde woman and her daughter. He wondered if they had made it home safely, if their homestead was sturdy enough to withstand such a storm. Meanwhile, Sarah was fighting to control the horses as they struggled through the muddy road leading to her property. The rain made visibility nearly impossible, and the thunder spooked the animals. Emma clung to the wagon bench, her doll pressed against her chest, trying to be brave even though she was terrified. "It's all right, sweetheart," Sarah called over the storm's roar. "We're almost home." But the truth was that Sarah was lost. The familiar landmarks were obscured by the rain, and in her haste to escape the storm, she had taken a wrong turn. They were heading west instead of north, moving away from their homestead and toward more dangerous territory where army patrols rarely ventured. By the time Sarah realized her mistake, it was too late. The wagon wheel hit a hidden rock, and she heard the sickening crack of breaking wood. The wagon lurched to one side, throwing both Sarah and Emma from the bench. Sarah hit the ground hard, her head striking a stone. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Emma's frightened face, the little girl calling out for her mama. Emma knelt beside her unconscious mother, rain pouring down on them both, tears mixing with the rainwater on her cheeks. She shook Sarah's shoulder, but her mother didn't wake up. The little girl looked around desperately, but saw nothing except prairie grass, rocks, and the storm-darkened sky. They were alone, far from help, and night was beginning to fall. Emma sat beside her mother's unconscious form through the long, terrifying night. The storm had eventually passed, leaving the prairie soaked and cold under a sky full of stars. The little girl had tried everything she could think of to wake her mother, talking to her, shaking her gently, even singing the lullaby Sarah always sang to her at bedtime. But Sarah remained still, breathing shallowly, a dark bruise forming on her temple where she had struck the stone. As dawn broke across the Texas prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Emma made a decision. She couldn't stay here waiting and hoping someone would find them. She had to get help. The problem was that she had no idea where they were or which direction to go. The landscape looked the same in every direction: rolling hills covered in tall grass, scattered rocks, and occasional clusters of mesquite trees. The little girl stood on shaky legs, her dress still damp from the rain, and looked at the wagon. One wheel was completely shattered, and the horses had broken free during the night, probably spooked by thunder or wild animals. They were gone, leaving only broken leather straps hanging from the wagon's harness. Emma's stomach growled with hunger, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She found some dried jerky in one of the supply packages and forced herself to eat a piece, though fear had taken away most of her appetite. She also found a canteen of water and took a small drink, remembering her mother's warnings about conserving supplies when traveling. "I'll be back, Mama," Emma whispered, kneeling beside Sarah one more time. She kissed her mother's cheek, which felt cool to the touch. "I'm going to find help, I promise." With her cloth doll tucked under one arm, Emma began walking. She chose east because the sun was rising in that direction, and she vaguely remembered her mother once saying that Fort Griffin was to the south and east of their homestead. Of course, Emma had no way of knowing that they were actually west of where they should be, which meant she was walking parallel to the fort rather than toward it. The morning sun grew hot quickly, and Emma's small legs tired easily. She had never walked such a distance before, and the uneven terrain made every step challenging. Several times she stumbled over rocks hidden in the grass, scraping her knees through her thin dress. But she kept going, driven by the image of her mother lying unconscious and alone. Meanwhile, back at Fort Griffin, Dakota prepared for the scouting expedition Lieutenant Morrison had discussed with him. He gathered his supplies methodically, checking his weapons, filling his water skins, and packing dried meat and hardtack for the journey. The storm had delayed their departure by a day, but Morrison was eager to begin mapping the western territories. As Dakota worked, his thoughts kept returning to the blonde woman and her daughter. Something about them had stayed with him through the night, an unusual feeling he couldn't shake. He told himself it was simply concern for fellow human beings caught in a dangerous storm, but there was more to it than that. The woman's fierce determination to provide for her child, Her pride struggling against her need to accept help reminded him of his own mother who had died during a cavalry raid when he was 15. "Ready to ride?" Morrison asked, approaching with a small contingent of soldiers who would accompany them on the expedition. Dakota nodded, but before he could mount his horse, a commotion near the fort's entrance caught his attention. 2 soldiers were returning from an early morning patrol, and between their horses walked a small figure that made Dakota's blood run cold. It was Emma, the little girl from yesterday, covered in dirt and scratches, stumbling with exhaustion. The warrior moved quickly, reaching the child before the soldiers could question her. Emma looked up at him with frightened, exhausted eyes, and recognition flickered across her face. "You," she whispered. "You're the man who helped my mama yesterday." "Where is your mother?" Dakota asked, kneeling to her level, his voice urgent but gentle. Emma's lower lip trembled, and tears began streaming down her dirty face. "Sir, my mother didn't come home last night," she said, her voice breaking. "The wagon crashed in the storm and Mama hit her head. She won't wake up. I walked and walked trying to find help, but I got so tired and I didn't know which way to go. And then these soldiers found me and brought me here, and I need someone to help my mama, please. She needs help." The words tumbled out in a rush, the little girl's composure finally breaking as she began to sob. Dakota caught her as she swayed with exhaustion and dehydration, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Morrison hurried over, his face grave with concern. "How long ago did this happen?" the lieutenant asked. "Last night," Emma managed between sobs. "During the storm, Mama was trying to get us home, but we got lost, and then the wheel broke." "Can you tell us which direction you walked from?" Morrison pressed, but Emma just shook her head helplessly. "I don't know, I just walked toward the sun when it came up." Dakota's mind was already calculating possibilities. The storm had hit in the late afternoon. If the woman and child had been heading north toward their homestead but got turned around in the storm, they could be anywhere in a wide radius west or northwest of the fort. And if Sarah Mitchell had been unconscious since last night, she might be suffering from serious head trauma. Time was critical. "I'm going to find her," Dakota announced, his tone brooking no argument. Morrison nodded immediately. "Take whatever you need. I'll send a patrol to search as well, but you'll move faster alone." "The child said they were heading home when the storm hit?" "Yes, their homestead is 5 miles north of the fort," Dakota confirmed. "But if they got lost in the storm, they could have gone west instead." He looked down at Emma, who was clinging to his buckskin shirt with small fists. "Little one, I need you to tell me everything you remember about last night. Every detail, no matter how small." Emma wiped her eyes and tried to focus, her exhaustion making it difficult to think clearly. It got dark really fast because of the storm clouds. Mama was driving fast, trying to beat the rain. I remember we passed some big rocks that looked like they were stacked on top of each other. And there were birds. Lots of birds flying away from the storm. "Rock formations," Dakota murmured, his knowledge of the territory bringing images to mind. "There are stacked rock formations about 8 miles west-northwest of here. If they passed those, they were definitely heading the wrong direction." He looked at Morrison. "I know where to search. Go," Morrison ordered. "I'll have the doctor standing by. Bring her back, Dakota." The warrior handed Emma to one of the soldiers' wives who had come to see what the commotion was about, a kind woman named Martha, who immediately began comforting the exhausted child. "I will bring your mother back," Dakota promised Emma, his dark eyes intense with determination. "You must rest now and trust me." "Please hurry," Emma whispered. "She's all alone out there." Dakota was already moving, returning to his horse and mounting in one fluid motion. He carried minimal supplies, knowing that speed was essential. His horse was a magnificent painted stallion, one of the few remaining from his tribe's once great herds, bred for endurance and sure-footedness across the prairie. Within moments he was galloping out of the fort, heading west-northwest toward the rock formations Emma had described. As he rode, Dakota's thoughts were focused entirely on the search. He read the land the way settlers read books, noticing every detail, every sign of passage. The storm had washed away most tracks, but there were other indicators if you knew what to look for. Displaced grass, disturbed rocks, the flight patterns of birds that had been startled by something unusual. He found the stacked rock formations Emma had mentioned within an hour, confirming his theory about their direction. From there, he began searching in an expanding pattern, his sharp eyes scanning the prairie for any sign of a wagon or human presence. The sun climbed higher in the sky, growing hotter, and Dakota knew that if Sarah Mitchell was injured and exposed to this heat without water, her condition would deteriorate rapidly. It was nearly noon when he spotted the wagon. It sat at an angle in a shallow depression, one wheel clearly broken, looking abandoned and forlorn in the vast prairie. Dakota urged his horse forward, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. Sarah lay exactly where Emma had left her, curled on her side near the wagon, her dress torn and stained with mud. For a terrible moment, Dakota thought he might be too late, but as he dismounted and knelt beside her, he saw the slight rise and fall of her chest. She was alive, but her breathing was shallow, and her skin was hot to the touch. The bruise on her temple had darkened to a deep purple, and she showed no response when he gently touched her shoulder. "Sarah Mitchell," he said firmly, remembering her name from yesterday. "Can you hear me?" There was no response. Dakota quickly assessed the situation. She was dehydrated, probably had a concussion, and had been lying in the sun for hours. He needed to get fluids into her and cool her down before attempting to move her. He retrieved his water skin and carefully lifted her head, dribbling small amounts of water onto her cracked lips. Some of it slid into her mouth, and he saw her throat work reflexively to swallow. He repeated this process several times, then wet his bandana and laid it across her forehead, trying to cool her fevered skin. As he worked, he found himself studying her face more closely than he had yesterday. Even unconscious and injured, there was a delicate beauty to her features, a strength in the set of her jaw that spoke of resilience and courage. Her blonde hair had come loose from its pins and spread across the ground like spun gold. Dakota shook his head, annoyed with himself for such thoughts when the woman's life hung in the balance. He fashioned a travois from materials in the wagon, using the canvas covering and some of the wooden supports that hadn't been damaged. It was rough work, but it would allow him to transport Sarah back to the fort without subjecting her to the jarring ride she would endure if he tried to carry her on horseback. As he carefully lifted Sarah onto the travois, she moaned softly, the first sound she had made. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. "Your daughter is safe," Dakota told her, not knowing if she could hear him but hoping his words might reach her somewhere in her unconscious state. Emma found help. She was very brave. "Now you must be brave too and hold on. I am taking you to the fort's doctor." He secured her as comfortably as possible, then attached the travois to his horse. The journey back would be slow and careful, and he would have to stop frequently to give Sarah more water and check her condition. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Dakota began the long trek back to Fort Griffin, leading his horse on foot to ensure the travois didn't hit any obstacles that might injure Sarah further. As he walked, Dakota found his thoughts turning to questions about this woman who had so unexpectedly entered his life. What had brought her to this harsh land? How long had she been widowed? What kind of strength did it take for a woman alone to try to maintain a homestead in Texas frontier territory? He had seen many settlers come and go, most of them defeated by the harsh realities of prairie life. But something told him Sarah Mitchell was not like most settlers. She was a fighter, someone who would endure whatever hardships necessary to protect her daughter and build a life for them both. The journey took hours, with frequent stops to check on Sarah's condition and give her more water. By the time the walls of Fort Griffin came into view in the late afternoon sun, Dakota's muscles ached from the long walk, but he felt a surge of relief. They had made it. Now it was up to the fort's doctor to do what he could to save her life. Lieutenant Morrison met him at the gate, having posted lookouts to watch for his return. "You found her," he said, his relief evident. "Emma will be overjoyed. The child hasn't stopped worrying since you left." "She lives, but she is in bad condition," Dakota reported. "She needs the doctor immediately." Within minutes, soldiers had carefully transferred Sarah to a stretcher and were carrying her to the fort's small medical facility. The doctor, a gruff but competent man named Dr. Henderson, began examining her immediately. Dakota stood outside the medical building, suddenly exhausted now that the urgency of the search and rescue had passed. Emma came running from the officers' quarters where Martha had been caring for her, her small face lighting up with hope when she saw Dakota. "Did you find her? Is my mama okay?" Dakota knelt down. placing a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. I found her. The doctor is caring for her now. She is hurt, but she is alive. You must be patient and let the doctor do his work. Emma threw her arms around the warrior's neck, hugging him tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saving my mama. Dakota felt something crack in the careful walls he had built around his heart. This small child's trust, her simple gratitude, touched him in ways he hadn't expected. He awkwardly patted her back, unused to such displays of affection. Your mother is strong, he told her. She will fight to return to you. Inside the medical facility, Dr. Henderson worked steadily, cleaning Sarah's wounds, checking her pupils, and monitoring her vital signs. The concussion was serious, but he had seen worse. With proper care and rest, she had a good chance of recovery. The dehydration was more concerning, but they were addressing that with careful hydration. As evening fell over Fort Griffin, Dakota found himself unable to leave the area near the medical facility. He told himself he was simply waiting to hear the doctor's assessment, to know that his rescue efforts hadn't been in vain. But the truth was more complicated. Something about Sarah Mitchell and her daughter had awakened feelings he had thought long dead, buried along with his old life as a free Comanche warrior. Sarah's eyes opened slowly, her vision blurry and unfocused. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar, made of rough wooden planks instead of the whitewashed boards of her homestead. Confusion clouded her mind as she tried to remember where she was and how she had gotten here. Her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, and when she tried to move, every muscle in her body protested. Easy now, Mrs. Mitchell, a gruff voice said from somewhere to her left. You've been unconscious for nearly 2 days. Don't try to move too quickly. 2 days. Sarah's heart lurched with sudden panic, and she tried to sit up despite the doctor's warning. Emma! Where's Emma? My daughter. Is she safe? Dr. Henderson gently but firmly pressed her back against the pillows. Your daughter is perfectly fine thanks to that Comanche scout. The little girl walked halfway across the prairie looking for help, brave as any soldier I've seen. Dakota found you and brought you back here. You've been at Fort Griffin's medical facility since yesterday afternoon. The memories came flooding back. The storm, getting lost, the wagon wheel breaking, the terrible impact when she hit the ground. And before that, the Comanche warrior who had helped them when the flour spilled. Dakota. That was his name. I need to see Emma, Sarah said, her voice weak but determined. Please, I need to know she's all right. She's been here every day, sitting right outside that door, Dr. Henderson replied with a slight smile. Martha Evans has been looking after her, but the child refuses to go far from this building. I'll send for her now that you're awake. But first, let me check your condition. The doctor examined her pupils, asked her several questions to assess her memory and cognitive function, and checked the wound on her temple. You're a lucky woman, Mrs. Mitchell. That was a serious blow to the head. Another few hours in the sun without water, and we might not be having this conversation. You have Dakota to thank for your life. Before Sarah could respond, the door burst open and Emma came running in, tears of joy streaming down her face. Mama! Mama, you're awake! Sarah opened her arms, ignoring the pain, and Emma climbed carefully onto the bed, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Oh, sweetheart, Sarah whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. I'm so sorry. You must have been so frightened. I was, Emma admitted, her voice muffled against Sarah's dress. But I remembered what you always tell me about being brave and doing what needs to be done. So I walked and walked until the soldiers found me, and then Dakota went to find you, and he brought you back, Mama. He saved you. Sarah held her daughter close, tears sliding down her own cheeks as she processed everything that had happened. Her little girl, only 7 years old, had walked alone across the dangerous prairie to find help. The thought of what could have happened, the countless dangers Emma could have faced, made Sarah's blood run cold. But her brave, determined daughter had survived, and more than that, she had succeeded in her mission. Where is he? Sarah asked quietly. Where is Dakota? I need to thank him. He's been here every evening, Dr. Henderson said, his tone suggesting he found this behavior unusual. Never comes inside, just sits out there on that bench, checking to see if there's been any change in your condition. He should be arriving soon, actually. Man's as regular as clockwork. Sarah wanted to protest that she should rest, that she wasn't presentable, that she needed time to compose herself before facing the man who had saved her life. But before she could voice any of these concerns, there was a soft knock on the door. "That'll be him now," Dr. Henderson said, moving to open the door. Dakota stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the evening light. His dark eyes immediately found Sarah, and something flickered across his usually stoic expression. Relief, perhaps, or something deeper that he quickly masked. He stepped inside, moving with the quiet grace of a predator, and stopped a respectful distance from the bed. "You are awake," he said simply, his deep voice sending an unexpected shiver through Sarah. "This is good. Your daughter has been worried. Because of you, I'm alive to see her worry," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Dakota, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life, and my daughter's life as well. I owe you a debt I can never repay." "There is no debt," Dakota said firmly, the same words he had spoken when he gave her money to replace the flour. Any man with honor would have done the same. "But you weren't just any man," Sarah insisted. "You went searching for someone you barely knew, a stranger, and you didn't stop until you found me. That speaks to your character, to who you are as a person. Please allow me to at least express my gratitude properly." Dakota shifted uncomfortably, unused to such effusive thanks. In his culture, helping those in need was simply expected, not something that required elaborate acknowledgement. But he could see that this was important to Sarah, that she needed to express what she was feeling. "Your gratitude is heard and accepted," he said with a slight inclination of his head, a gesture that was almost a bow. Emma, who had been watching this exchange with wide eyes, suddenly slipped off the bed and walked over to Dakota. She looked up at him with absolute trust and reached for his hand. "Will you come visit us when Mama is better? At our homestead? I want to show you my garden and the chickens, and the place by the creek where the wildflowers grow." Dakota looked down at the small hand holding his, such a contrast between her pale skin and his darker complexion, and felt that same crack in his carefully constructed walls widening. "If your mother permits it," he said carefully, glancing at Sarah. Sarah found herself nodding before she had fully considered the implications. "Of course. You would be welcome any time, Mr. Dakota, though I'm not sure when we'll be able to return home. The wagon is damaged, and I don't even know if our supplies survived the storm." "The wagon can be repaired," Dakota said. "Lieutenant Morrison has already authorized the fort's carpenter to work on it. Your supplies that were not damaged have been stored in the quartermaster's warehouse. When you are well enough to travel, I will take you home." "You've already done so much," Sarah protested weakly, though the relief she felt was immense. The thought of trying to arrange transportation and salvage what she could from the wreckage had been weighing on her mind since she woke up. "It is not finished until you are safely home," Dakota stated, his tone making it clear this was not up for debate. Over the following days, as Sarah recovered under Dr. Henderson's care, an unexpected pattern developed. Dakota came every evening, initially just to check on Sarah's progress, but gradually staying longer, drawn into conversation. Emma appointed herself as his official welcomer, running to greet him whenever he arrived, and chattering away about her day, telling him stories about life on the homestead, asking him questions about his life as a scout. At first, Dakota answered Emma's questions with brief factual responses, but the little girl's genuine curiosity and complete lack of fear or prejudice gradually broke down his reserve. He found himself telling her stories about tracking animals, about reading signs in nature that most people would never notice, about the stars, and how his people used them for navigation. Sarah watched these interactions with a mixture of gratitude and something else she couldn't quite name. Dakota was patient with Emma in a way that reminded her painfully of her late husband, Thomas. But there was something different about Dakota, a quiet strength and dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. She found herself looking forward to his visits, noticing small details about him that she probably shouldn't have been noticing. The way his long hair caught the lamplight, the rare smile that transformed his usually serious face when Emma said something amusing, the gentle way he spoke to her daughter despite his warrior's bearing. On the 5th day after regaining consciousness, Dr. Henderson declared Sarah well enough to leave the medical facility, though he cautioned her against any strenuous activity for at least another week. The carpenter had finished repairing the wagon, and Dakota had already arranged to take them home the following morning. That evening, as Dakota made his usual visit, Sarah asked him to sit down, gesturing to the chair beside her bed. Emma was already asleep in the small cot Martha Evans had set up, exhausted from a day of playing with the other children at the fort. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened," Sarah began, her hands twisting nervously in her lap, "about fate, or providence, or whatever force brought us together. That first day when I dropped the flower and you helped us, I never imagined it would lead to this. You saving my life, spending your evenings keeping my daughter company, arranging our safe return home. It seems like too much to be mere coincidence." Dakota was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face in the lamplight. "In my culture, we believe that spirits sometimes guide people to where they need to be," he said slowly. "Perhaps your path and mine were meant to cross, Mrs. Mitchell." "Sarah," she corrected softly. "Please call me Sarah. After everything we've been through, formality seems unnecessary." "Sarah," he repeated, and the way he said her name, with that slight accent and deep voice, sent warmth through her chest. "And you should call me Dakota, not Mr. Dakota. In my language, my name means friend to all, but I have found that true friendship is rare between my people and yours. Then perhaps it's time to change that," Sarah said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Perhaps true friendship is exactly what we're building here." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. They were both outsiders in their own ways. Sarah, a widow struggling to survive in a man's world, constantly judged and pitied by other settlers. Dakota, a Comanche warrior who had chosen to work with the army, trusted by neither his own people nor fully accepted by the whites. In each other, they had found something unexpected, someone who understood what it meant to stand at the intersection of two worlds, belonging fully to neither. "I would like that," Dakota said quietly. "Friendship with you and Emma. It has been a long time since I felt welcomed anywhere." "Then consider our home your home," Sarah replied, meaning every word. "Whenever you need a place to rest, a warm meal, or simply someone to talk to, our door will be open to you." The next morning, Dakota arrived with the repaired wagon hitched to two strong horses he had borrowed from the army stable. Sarah, still weak but determined to return to her homestead, allowed him to help her onto the wagon bench. Emma scrambled up beside her mother, chattering excitedly about going home and seeing her chickens again. The journey took several hours, with Dakota riding his painted stallion alongside the wagon, keeping a watchful eye on Sarah to make sure she wasn't overexerting herself. He pointed out landmarks to Emma, teaching her how to navigate by natural features, explaining which plants were edible and which were poisonous, sharing knowledge that had kept his people alive on these plains for generations. When they finally reached Sarah's homestead, Dakota felt a mixture of admiration and concern. The cabin was small but well-maintained, built from logs with a sod roof. A vegetable garden showed signs of careful tending, though it had suffered from neglect during Sarah's absence. A chicken coop stood near the cabin, and several brown hens came running when Emma called to them. Beyond the cabin, a creek provided water, its banks lined with cottonwood trees that offered shade. But Dakota's experienced eye also noticed the vulnerabilities. The cabin was isolated, far from any neighbors. The fence around the property was in poor repair. There were signs that wild animals, probably coyotes or wolves, had been testing the chicken coop's defenses. For a woman alone with a small child, this place was both home and potential trap. "It's not much," Sarah said, seeming to read his thoughts. "But it's ours. Thomas, my late husband, built this cabin with his own hands. Every log, every board represents his dream of building something permanent, something we could pass down to Emma and her children someday. It is a good home," Dakota said sincerely, "but you should not be alone out here. It is dangerous for a woman and child without protection." "I manage," Sarah replied, her pride showing through. "I have Thomas's rifle, and I know how to use it. We've survived this long." "Surviving is not the same as living," Dakota observed, dismounting from his horse. "Let me help you unload the wagon, and then I will check your property. Make sure everything is secure. Despite Sarah's protests that he had already done enough, Dakota spent the rest of the day working around the homestead. He repaired the weakest sections of the fence, reinforced the chicken coop against predators, checked the cabin's roof for damage from the storm, and chopped enough firewood to last Sarah for several weeks. Emma followed him everywhere, handing him tools, asking endless questions, clearly smitten with her new hero. As the sun began to set, Sarah called them both inside for supper. She had insisted on cooking despite her lingering weakness, preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork. They sat around the rough wooden table, and for the first time in years, Sarah's cabin felt full, alive with conversation and laughter. After Emma had been put to bed, Dakota prepared to leave, knowing he needed to return to the fort. But Sarah stopped him at the door, her hand on his arm. "Dakota, wait," she said softly. "I meant what I said at the fort. You're welcome here any time. In fact, I'd feel better knowing you might stop by occasionally just to check on us. I know you have your duties as a scout, but when you're not on expedition, if you need a place to stay that's not the fort, the barn has a dry loft with clean hay. It's not fancy, but it's shelter." Dakota looked down at her hand on his arm. Such a simple touch, but one that sent unexpected warmth through him. "You would trust me that much? To come and go from your property as I please?" "I trust you with my life," Sarah said simply. "You've already proven yourself worthy of that trust. Besides, Emma would be heartbroken if she thought she'd never see you again. She's been through so much loss already. Please, don't be a stranger." The weeks that followed brought a transformation to Sarah's homestead that she never could have anticipated. Dakota began visiting regularly, at first every few days, then more frequently as his presence became woven into the fabric of their daily lives. He would arrive in the early morning or late afternoon, depending on his duties at the fort, and would spend hours working on projects around the property. He expanded the vegetable garden, showing Sarah which native plants could supplement their crops. He taught Emma how to track animals and read weather signs. He reinforced the cabin's defenses and built a proper smokehouse for preserving meat. But more than the physical improvements, Dakota's presence brought something Sarah hadn't realized she'd been missing since Thomas died. Partnership. Someone to share the burden of survival, to make decisions with, to simply talk to at the end of a long day. She found herself watching for his arrival, her heart lifting when she spotted his distinctive painted stallion on the horizon. Emma blossomed under Dakota's attention. The little girl who had been so quiet and withdrawn after her father's death became animated and curious again, constantly asking questions and eagerly learning everything Dakota was willing to teach her. She began following him around like a shadow, and Dakota, despite his initial awkwardness, grew comfortable with the role of teacher and protector. One evening, about 6 weeks after the accident, Dakota stayed later than usual. Emma had finally fallen asleep after begging for just one more story, and Sarah invited him to sit on the porch with her. The Texas sky was ablaze with stars, and the creek burbled peacefully in the distance. Cicadas sang their evening song, and a gentle breeze brought relief from the day's heat. "I've been thinking about the future," Sarah said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "About what happens when winter comes, when the work becomes harder and the days shorter. About what Emma needs as she grows older. About what I want versus what's practical." Dakota listened without interrupting, sensing that Sarah needed to voice these thoughts that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "I can't keep doing this alone," Sarah continued, her voice catching slightly. "Not forever. This homestead, this life, it requires more than one person can sustain. I've been stubborn about it, clinging to Thomas's dream because letting go felt like betraying his memory. But he wouldn't want me to sacrifice Emma's future, or my own well-being, out of misplaced loyalty to the past." "What are you saying?" Dakota asked, though he thought he understood where her thoughts were leading. Sarah turned to face him, her blue eyes reflecting the starlight. "I'm saying that over these past weeks I've come to depend on you in ways I never expected. I've come to care for you in ways that frighten me because they feel like a betrayal of what I had with Thomas, but also feel more right than anything has felt in years. And I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching, the way you are with Emma. The way you've become part of our lives so naturally, it's like you were always meant to be here." Dakota's heart pounded in his chest. He had been fighting these feelings, telling himself that the gap between their worlds was too wide, that a Comanche warrior and a white widow could never truly bridge that divide. But Sarah's words gave voice to everything he had been feeling, all the emotions he had been trying to suppress. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "from the moment I saw you in Fort Griffin, something inside me recognized you. When Emma came to the fort that morning, frightened and exhausted, asking for help, I knew I would search until I found you, or died trying. These weeks, coming here, working beside you, watching you with Emma, I have felt more at home than I have felt anywhere since my people were forced onto the reservations." He reached out, taking her hand in his, feeling the calluses from hard work, the strength in her fingers. "But I am Comanche. You are white. The world will not look kindly on what might grow between us. People will judge you, will make your life harder than it already is. I would not bring that burden to you unless you were certain it was what you wanted." Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes never leaving his face. "The world has judged me since the day Thomas died, Dakota. Judged me for trying to keep this homestead alone, for not remarrying immediately, for not being properly helpless and dependent. I've learned that I can't live my life based on what others think I should do. I have to follow what my heart tells me is right. And my heart tells me that you are a good man, an honorable man, and that what's growing between us is worth fighting for." Dakota pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face gently. "You are certain? Once we cross this line, there is no going back. People will talk. They will say terrible things. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared for anything as long as I'm not facing it alone," Sarah whispered. "As long as I have you beside me." Dakota kissed her then, soft and careful, a kiss full of promise and barely restrained passion. Sarah responded, her arms wrapping around his neck, feeling truly alive for the first time in years. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Dakota rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Sarah Mitchell," he said, the words coming from somewhere deep in his soul. "I will love you and protect you and Emma for the rest of my days, if you will have me." "I love you too," Sarah replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I didn't think I could feel this way again, but you've shown me that the heart has room for more than one great love. Yes, Dakota. Yes, I will have you. We will have you." The next morning, Sarah and Dakota sat Emma down to explain what was happening. The little girl listened with wide eyes as they carefully explained that Dakota would be staying with them permanently, that he and Sarah loved each other and wanted to build a life together as a family. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then a huge smile broke across her face. "Does this mean Dakota will be my new papa?" she asked, her voice full of hope. Dakota knelt down to her level, his expression serious but warm. "I will never try to replace your father, Emma. He was a good man who loved you very much. But I would be honored to be part of your family, to protect you and teach you and watch you grow, if you are willing to accept me." Emma threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. I am willing. I've been wishing and wishing that you could stay with us forever, and now you can." Sarah watched this exchange with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by the love she felt for both of them. Her little broken family was being mended, transformed into something new and beautiful. The weeks that followed were not without challenges. When Dakota and Sarah went to Fort Griffin to announce their intention to marry, they faced exactly the prejudice Dakota had warned about. Some of the settlers looked at them with disgust. Others whispered behind their hands. A few made openly hostile comments about savages and foolish widows who should know better. But Lieutenant Morrison surprised them both by offering his full support. "Dakota is one of the finest men I've ever known," he told Sarah firmly. "Any woman would be lucky to have him. Don't let small-minded fools tell you otherwise." Dr. Henderson and his wife Martha also stood by them, as did several of the soldiers who had worked with Dakota and respected his skills and character. The fort's chaplain agreed to perform the ceremony, though he cautioned them about the difficult road ahead. "Love is never easy," the chaplain said, "but love that crosses cultural boundaries faces extra challenges. You'll need to be strong for each other, to remember why you chose this path when times get hard. Can you do that?" "We can," Sarah and Dakota said in unison, their hands clasped together. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, with the Texas sky clear and blue. Sarah wore a simple dress she had sewn herself, pale yellow like prairie wildflowers. Dakota wore traditional Comanche clothing mixed with settler elements, a visual representation of the two worlds coming together. Emma stood beside them, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning, beaming with happiness. The ceremony was small, attended only by those who genuinely supported the union. Morrison gave Sarah away, standing in for the father she had lost years ago. Martha wept happy tears. A few of the soldiers who had worked with Dakota came to show their respect, and in a surprise that moved Dakota deeply, 2 elder Comanche from the nearby reservation attended, having heard about the wedding and wanting to offer their blessing. "You walk a difficult path, young warrior," one of the elders said to Dakota in their native language, "between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. But love is the bridge that connects all peoples. May your love for this woman and her child give you strength for the journey ahead." After the ceremony, Dakota took Sarah and Emma home to their homestead, which would now be their shared home. He had spent the previous weeks making improvements, expanding the cabin to include a larger bedroom and a proper loft for Emma. He had built new furniture, installed glass windows he had traded for at the fort, and even constructed a small porch where they could sit in the evenings. As the sun set on their wedding day, Sarah stood on that porch watching Dakota teach Emma how to properly care for the horses, her husband. The words still felt strange and wonderful. She had never imagined feeling this way again, had believed that her chance at love had died with Thomas, but life had surprised her, bringing this strong, gentle warrior into her world at exactly the moment when she needed him most. Dakota looked up and caught her watching them. He said something to Emma that made the little girl giggle, then walked over to Sarah, pulling her into his arms. "Happy, wife?" he asked, his accent making the English words sound exotic and beautiful. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Sarah replied, standing on her toes to kiss him. "Thank you for finding me that day. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for loving us. It is I who should thank you," Dakota murmured against her hair. "You gave me something I thought I had lost forever. A home, a family, a reason to believe that two worlds could come together and create something beautiful." Emma ran up to them, demanding attention, and they both laughed as she wedged herself between them, insisting on being part of the embrace. The 3 of them stood there as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, a family forged from loss and loneliness, strengthened by love and determination. The years that followed were not always easy. They faced prejudice from both white settlers and Comanche who disapproved of their union. There were hard winters when food was scarce, droughts that threatened their crops, and moments when Sarah questioned whether they could sustain their homestead. But through it all, they had each other. Dakota's knowledge of the land combined with Sarah's determination created a successful ranch that eventually became known throughout the region. Emma grew into a strong young woman who bridged both cultures naturally, speaking English and Comanche with equal fluency, comfortable in both worlds. Dakota continued working as a scout occasionally, but his primary focus became his family and their land. He taught Emma everything he knew about tracking, hunting, and surviving in the wilderness. He and Sarah had 2 more children, a son they named Thomas after Sarah's first husband, honoring that memory rather than trying to erase it, and a daughter they named Naomi, which meant pleasant in Hebrew but sounded similar to a Comanche word meaning to see beauty. Their homestead became known as a place where both cultures were respected and welcomed. Comanche traveling through the area would often stop to trade or share news, knowing they would be treated with dignity. Settlers who were willing to look past prejudice found that Dakota was an invaluable source of knowledge about surviving on the frontier. Slowly, cautiously, their little homestead became a bridge between two worlds, proof that love could transcend cultural boundaries. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Sarah and Dakota sat on the same porch where he had first kissed her, watching the sun set over land they had transformed together. Emma, now 17, was inside helping her younger siblings prepare for bed. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Choosing this life, taking on a ready-made family, facing all the judgment and difficulty?" Dakota pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders, and smiled. "Not for a single moment. You and Emma and our children, you are my purpose, my joy, my reason for everything. That day I found you unconscious on the prairie. I thought I was saving your life, but the truth is you saved mine. You gave me a future when I thought my path had no direction. You gave me love when I thought my heart had forgotten how to feel." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, contentment filling her completely. "We saved each other," she said softly. "That's what love does. It saves us from loneliness, from despair, from giving up. And it gives us strength to face whatever challenges come our way." As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A spilled sack of flour, a devastating storm, a frightened little girl's desperate search for help. Any one of these events could have ended differently, could have led to tragedy instead of triumph. But somehow, against all odds, they had found each other. Emma emerged from the cabin, grown beautiful and strong, carrying little Thomas on her hip while Naomi held her hand. "Mama, Papa, the children want you to come tell them a story before bed." Dakota and Sarah stood, hands clasped, and followed their children inside. As they settled the little ones into their beds, Emma leaned against the doorframe, watching her parents with a soft smile. She barely remembered the fear and loneliness of those days before Dakota had come into their lives. Her childhood had been filled with love from both her birth father's memory and her stepfather's present devotion. She had grown up seeing two cultures blend harmoniously, learning that love recognized no boundaries of race or background. Later that night, after all the children were finally asleep, Sarah and Dakota lay in their bed, wrapped in each other's arms. "Tell me again," Sarah whispered. "Tell me how you felt that first day when you saw me in Fort Griffin." Dakota smiled in the darkness, knowing she loved to hear this story. "I felt like the spirits had sent me a vision," he said, his voice low and warm. "This beautiful woman with hair like prairie grass in autumn, struggling to care for her child alone, so fierce and determined despite her exhaustion. I thought, this is a warrior woman, even if she does not carry weapons. And I wanted to know her story, to understand what had brought such strength to her eyes. And now you know my story," Sarah murmured, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingers. "Now I am part of your story," Dakota corrected. "And you are part of mine. We have written our story together, Sarah. A story of two people from different worlds who chose love over fear, hope over prejudice, and family over loneliness. It is a good story, one worth telling." "It is," Sarah agreed, her eyes growing heavy with sleep. "It is a very good story indeed." Outside, the Texas wind whispered through the cottonwood trees by the creek, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. The homestead stood strong and secure, a testament to what could be built when two people committed to facing life's challenges together. The chickens roosted peacefully in their reinforced coop. The horses dozed in the barn. The vegetable garden, carefully tended and expanded over the years, lay ready for the next season's planting. And inside the cabin, a family slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that they were loved, protected, and cherished. A Comanche warrior who had found his home, a widow who had found her second chance at love, a little girl who had found the father she needed, and two younger children who would grow up knowing nothing but the security of a family built on love, respect, and unwavering commitment. It had all started with a simple act of kindness, a warrior offering coins to replace spilled flour for a struggling stranger. But that small moment had set in motion a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. Sarah Mitchell and Dakota had found each other in the vast loneliness of the Texas frontier, and together they had created something beautiful, enduring, and true. Their love story would be remembered in the region for generations, a reminder that the human heart recognizes no boundaries, and that true love, when given the chance to flourish, can bridge any divide and overcome any obstacle. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, the homestead rested peacefully, a beacon of hope and love in the wilderness, proof that even in the harshest landscapes and most difficult circumstances, Love could not only survive but thrive, creating beauty, meaning, and family where before there had been only struggle and solitude.